For years, she evaded consequences for her inappropriate behavior until she struck a formally attired black man in court, unaware that he was the judge. The immediate aftermath shattered everything she had established. It unfolded rapidly, unexpectedly. Neither the bailiff, the court reporter, nor even the defendant seated anxiously in the front row anticipated it. Officer Tiffany Rourke had just entered courtroom 2B within the Franklin County Courthouse in Missouri. Her uniform was impeccable, her jaw set, as was her habit. She had established a reputation over the last 10 years, known for being authoritative, direct, and someone to avoid provoking. That morning, she was scheduled to testify in a minor drug possession case. However, she did not reach the witness stand. She noticed a sharply dressed black man standing close to the witness box, speaking softly with one of the attorneys. Without hesitation, she swiftly crossed the courtroom floor and slapped him across the face. The impact resonated through the room. A gasp followed, shared and instantaneous. You could hear the sound of papers falling, a pen rolling onto the floor. For a moment, everything seemed to still. Everyone remained motionless. The man showed no reaction. He didn't flinch, yell, lunge, or raise a hand. He calmly adjusted his tie, brushed his cheek with the back of his hand, and looked her directly in the eye. "I'm Judge Antoine Kelly," he stated, his voice even and deliberate, "and I'm presiding over this courtroom today." That silence? It wasn't just shock anymore. It was palpable, a heavy presence. Every pair of eyes focused on Tiffany, who now appeared as if she'd swallowed a bucket of nails. She blinked once, twice, her mouth barely moving as if struggling to speak. The bailiff, hesitant about the situation, moved restlessly near the door. The young public defender close by immediately reached for her phone, documenting the scene discreetly. Others followed suit. Within seconds, at least 4 phones were recording the event. Tiffany attempted to speak. "I thought he wasn't supposed to be," but the moment had passed. Judge Kelly addressed the silent courtroom and announced, "We're taking a 10-minute recess." Then, he entered his chambers, silent, his expression unreadable. The room remained still. No one knew whether to stand, sit, or depart. Tiffany remained motionless. Her hand, the one she'd used, trembled subtly at her side. The prosecutor approached her and whispered, "You just assaulted a judge." Tiffany gazed at him, visibly pale and blinking quickly, as if the foundation had been removed from beneath her. The news spread rapidly. News reporters, awaiting a separate gang indictment case, quickly entered the hallway. Interns, having left the room visibly shaken, alerted 2 local news outlets. By noon, the video appeared on social media. It was unedited, uncontextualized footage depicting a white police officer in uniform striking a black judge in the courtroom. The accompanying caption on many reposts read, "Cop slaps a judge, unaware he is a judge." Initially, several commenters questioned its authenticity, suggesting it might be staged. The video lacked polish. It mirrored the unpredictable nature of everyday existence. There was no background music, no dramatic camera work, only palpable tension and genuine emotions. Subsequently, responses emerged from lawyers, activists, and former defendants, each possessing unique perspectives. Some immediately identified Tiffany, while others knew her through her reputation. Judge Kelly, however, remained silent. He released no public statement, avoided television appearances, and refrained from pursuing legal action. He remained seated behind his desk, reviewing the day's schedule as if nothing had occurred. However, everyone else recognized a significant change, the kind of change that leaves a lasting impact. Yet, before anyone could fully understand the implications, questions began to surface. What was the truth about Officer Tiffany Rourke? Prior to the incident, most individuals outside of Franklin County were unfamiliar with the name Tiffany Rourke. Within the force, however, she wasn't merely recognized, she was feared. Tiffany's ascent was rapid. Some believe it was too rapid. After graduating from the academy in her early 20s, she progressed to patrol, then narcotics, and subsequently to a specialized task force concentrating on high-risk neighborhoods. She received medals, appeared in department newsletters, and presented at 2 police conferences. However, beyond the publicized events and formal greetings, there existed another facet of Tiffany, the one largely unknown to the public. The initial signs were subtle. A young black driver, ticketed for a broken taillight, asserted he had not violated any laws. When he attempted to explain his situation, Tiffany increased the fine, citing noncompliance. He subsequently submitted a formal complaint, which was not addressed. A Latina mother reported that Tiffany conducted a vehicle search without justification outside a grocery store. When her 10-year-old daughter inquired about the reason, Tiffany responded, "You people should know better." The mother became distressed and filed a report, which was closed within a week. Subsequently, an event occurred that nearly reached the media. A video surfaced showing Tiffany verbally abusing 2 black teenagers seated outside a convenience store. She accused them of loitering. One of the teenagers recorded her outburst. However, the clip disappeared after the boys were arrested for resisting. There were also rumors circulating within the department's locker rooms and among court clerks. Tiffany reportedly used derogatory language when she believed she wasn't being observed. She allegedly threatened junior officers who did not support her in their official reports. Whenever her name surfaced in a formal grievance, the Internal Affairs Division discreetly marked the file as not sustained. She benefited from influential connections, including Chief Brannon, who described her as a capable officer navigating difficult circumstances. He believed the public lacked comprehension regarding the demands of policing in those communities. Fellow officers, such as Officer Sam Delaney, recognized the pattern early on. He once attempted to voice his concerns after witnessing Tiffany forcefully push a suspect's head against a cruiser window. She informed me that if I submitted any documents, my locker would be emptied by Monday. Consequently, he withdrew. They all did, not because they shared her perspective, but because Tiffany embodied the established order. She wasn't a deviation from it, nor an unusual case. She was the system. She represented the convergence of power and prejudice disguised by authority. And it wasn't simply her behavior, it was the confidence stemming from her perceived immunity. Around 6 months prior to the courtroom incident, a newly appointed officer, Jordan McLean, submitted a formal complaint following 2 weeks of riding alongside her. During that time, she halted 6 vehicles in a single day. All the drivers were black, and they were all within the same 3-block area. He documented in the internal log that none of the stops were warranted. McLean was then reassigned to desk duty 2 weeks later. Tiffany received a commendation. The underlying issue wasn't solely Tiffany's actions. It was the fact that others allowed her behavior to continue. Her advancement within the department wasn't in spite of her conduct, it stemmed from it. However, vulnerabilities had been appearing for some time prior to the incident involving Judge Kelly. Previously dismissed grievances began to reappear discreetly. The Internal Affairs Division had undergone a change in leadership, and recently elected city council members showed less willingness to ignore problematic issues. Yet, Tiffany remained unchanged. In fact, her actions intensified. At a precinct barbecue, she dismissed the evolving situation as political maneuvering, declaring to her colleagues, "They can't touch me. I possess more damaging information about a significant portion of this department than they have about me." She was unaware of this fact. However, that wasn't a display of influence. It was a countdown, and it had already begun. But when she delivered that false accusation in court, targeting the incorrect individual in the most detrimental location, that countdown reached 0. Consequently, the entire system she had depended on started to falter. When Judge Antoine Kelly returned to his chambers, he didn't forcefully close the door. He didn't discard any objects. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took a seat. He inhaled, moved closer, and grasped the pile of case files on his desk as if it were a routine Tuesday. However, it was anything but. This was unprecedented for the numerous individuals present in that courtroom. It was unusual for the lawyers who had witnessed considerable stress. But it was especially shocking for everyone involved. Nobody had ever seen a uniformed officer strike a sitting judge. Kelly had served as a judge for 12 years, primarily in Franklin County. He preferred a modest demeanor. He avoided publicity. He favored simple ties. He kept photos of his wife and 3 sons on his bookshelf, alongside a miniature gavel his youngest made in woodshop. Those who knew him understood one thing. His quiet presence carried weight. He had grown up in St. Peters, Missouri. He was the first in his family to go to college, then law school. He worked in public defense for 7 years before switching sides. He'd seen every kind of case, the petty, the tragic, the senseless. He treated them all with the same steady focus. The scene in that courtroom was jarring. That slap? It was a familiar feeling for him. Disrespect had been a constant companion throughout his career. However, this was unlike anything he's experienced. Not a subtle insult, but a physical act performed publicly and undeniably. Remarkably, he didn't react with anger or boasting. Kelly avoided theatrics. He prioritized accountability. In the hallway, his clerk, Monique Barnes, remained motionless, still clutching the folder she was intending to present prior to the incident. She entered his office cautiously. "Are you all right?" she inquired. He looked up, appearing composed. "I'm fine." She took a seat, her gaze carefully observing his face for any indication of anger. "I don't know what she thought she was doing," Monique stated. "We can file something. Press charges. The footage is already widespread." He nodded. "We could, but I want to observe how they manage it." She inclined her head. "You mean the department?" he asked, folding his hands. "The entire system." He continued. "Let's see if it's still averse to accountability." Monique noticed his approach. She understood his method. He wouldn't be aggressive. He would wait and allow them to reveal their intentions. By lunchtime, Judge Kelly's name was widely discussed online. People recalled him from a graduation speech delivered at a local high school 2 years prior. Video segments reappeared. Notable statements were shared. The law isn't a weapon. It's a tool, and it belongs to everyone, not just the loudest voices. However, he remained silent. He did not post on social media or issue a formal declaration. Responding to inquiries from reporters at the close of the day regarding potential charges, he offered this statement. "I anticipate the same level of professionalism and accountability that I have demonstrated to others over the past 12 years. I am confident that the system will address this appropriately." The situation presented a challenge, concealed by a demeanor of composure, and this was perceived by those around him. Concurrently, within the department, the atmosphere was becoming strained. The chief's assistant had left 3 messages on Tiffany's voicemail. A discreet inquiry was sent to HR by legal counsel representing the county. Simultaneously, at least 2 junior officers had reported being ill, seemingly to avoid involvement in the escalating situation. However, Kelly refrained from pressing the matter, as it was unnecessary. The recorded footage conveyed a more compelling narrative. Later that evening, at their residence, his wife, Nadine, sat beside him on the couch, holding his hand. "You should have permitted them to remove her in handcuffs," she stated softly. "I desired to do so." He confessed, "But I did not." She sighed, recognizing it wouldn't resolve the situation. "You think this time will be different?" He glanced at their joined hands. "I believe this time she chose the wrong man in the wrong place at the precise right moment." But if Tiffany thought the silence indicated defeat, she was about to discover just how resounding dignity could become when the nation was finally observing. By the following morning, Tiffany Rourke was placed on administrative leave. The official email from the department provided little detail. An investigation is underway concerning an incident involving court personnel. However, the details did not require a formal announcement. They were widely disseminated. The event rapidly spread online, with news broadcasts repeatedly showing it. Podcasts offered detailed analyses, and online forums were filled with accounts from individuals claiming prior negative experiences with her. A video surfaced from 4 years prior, depicting Tiffany arguing with a teenage boy during a traffic stop. The footage, grainy and captured by dashcam, showed her words slurred slightly, and her tone menacing. The boy had been released without charges. However, the recording remained unseen until now. This time, people weren't just speaking, they were paying attention, and her badge offered no protection. Within the department, disarray reigned. Officers murmured in hallways. Her closest allies, those who previously joked with her at Friday briefings, now abruptly had other commitments when she approached. A memo from Internal Affairs began circulating. We are seeking interviews with individuals who work directly under or alongside Officer Rourke. More than a dozen officers responded within 24 hours. Some did not provide their names. One of these officers, Detective Naomi Brennan, stated that she had waited almost 6 years to share her information. According to Naomi, she had previously threatened to reassign me to the county jail rotation if I questioned her reports again. A patrol officer, previously a cadet, recounted an instance where Tiffany placed a flashlight beneath a suspect's seat to create a pretext for a search. She referred to this as insurance, claiming no one would review her recorded footage. The situation had escalated beyond the initial incident. What began as a single event became a catalyst. Subsequently, a series of previously concealed issues were exposed. The Internal Affairs Department initiated a review of her prior reports, conducting comparisons. Analysis revealed certain trends, an imbalance in stops, and uncertain reasons given for those stops. The complaints persisted. Meanwhile, Tiffany attempted to shape the story. She contacted a local conservative talk show host, providing a hesitant phone interview, alleging the judge had appeared threatening and made a sudden action. The interview failed to gain traction. Even her consistent supporters hesitated. The sound of public relations defenses weakening became palpable when the host abruptly ended the segment, stating they would await further information before drawing conclusions. Subsequently, an email arrived from her union lawyer. A conflict of interest prevents me from continuing to represent you in this situation. Essentially, you're facing significant public scrutiny. Her inbox was flooded with messages. Journalists contacted her. Friends ceased responding. Even her daughter, 19-year-old Avery, a college freshman, sent a brief text. "Why would you do that, Mom?" Tiffany was seated in her kitchen. The once esteemed medals from her service were positioned above the refrigerator. They appeared altered now, more burdensome, as though they no longer belonged to her. She continued to feel she hadn't erred significantly. Not truly. He appeared like a perpetrator, she murmured, by herself at her kitchen table. He shouldn't have been present there, attired as he was, speaking as if he controlled the situation. Yet, she was aware. This wasn't about what Judge Kelly wore or his location. It was about her instinct, the one she never scrutinized, the one that had secured her advancements, esteem, and apprehension, but never responsibility. And now, that instinct had transformed into a destructive force. 2 days following the incident, the Franklin County Police Department conducted a press conference. Marking the first time in 15 years, the chief was accompanied by legal counsel. "We do not endorse Officer Rourke's behavior in the courtroom. An internal investigation is underway. We are treating this matter with utmost seriousness." He offered no praise, such as describing her as a good cop or noting distinguished service. He provided no words of support, just facts, objective and detached. Tiffany observed the press conference on her living room television, mirroring the actions of everyone else. However, if she believed the lack of communication from her colleagues was the most challenging aspect, she was soon to discover the consequences of the foundation she relied upon gradually disintegrating, piece by piece. Tiffany previously moved through the department with an air of ownership. That was no longer the case. Those few who still met her gaze did so fleetingly and anxiously, as if they wished to avoid association with her. The precinct felt different now. Her firm authority had vanished, leaving an unsettling emptiness. It was as if a flawed painting had been removed, yet the fastener remained embedded in the wall. The period of administrative leave stretched on, devoid of salary, identification, and explanation, only a prolonged wait. At her residence, her sphere of influence diminished rapidly. Her daughter, Avery, had ceased responding to messages, not since the night of the incident. They had not shared a particularly close bond. Tiffany had guided her upbringing with structure rather than affection. Now, The silence felt different. She attempted to call again. "This is your mom. Please, just talk to me." The line disconnected after the initial ring. Tiffany looked at her phone for a significant time before setting it face down. She had believed for so long that she was in charge, that people's fear indicated respect, that those internal criticisms were merely background noise from individuals who didn't comprehend the demands of the position. Now, she sat at her kitchen table, the blinds partially drawn to obscure the camera van parked across the street. Her time was abundant, and the silence was profound. She had not yet been charged. However, the department was no longer offering her protection. The union had ceased communication. The lawyers had stopped responding. Simultaneously, further allegations surfaced. A civil rights watchdog group submitted a petition demanding an independent review of each case she had handled during the previous 5 years. Individuals began to come forward, one after another. Individuals previously considered suspects, former officers, even a retired judge who remembered Tiffany yelling at a defendant during a trial. He had dismissed it then as stress. She checked online to read the comments, simply out of curiosity. Rourke exemplifies the need for reform. This woman believed she was above the law. She antagonized the wrong judge. Fortunately, and then the most damaging remarks from people who asserted they were her friends. I consistently felt uneasy about her. Her behavior was consistently overly assertive. I recall an instance where she laughed following a child's tears in an interrogation room. That moment remains vivid. It wasn't disloyalty, it felt like obliteration, as if she had no connection to them whatsoever. Her voicemail was overflowing with messages. Reporters, civil attorneys, and even a woman from a documentary company inquiring whether Tiffany would consider sharing her perspective. She did not respond to the call. The garage offered her a semblance of security. She would sit in the car, engine off, doors locked. She would spend hours inside, mechanically performing tasks, revisiting past cases in her thoughts, repeatedly telling herself that none of this would have occurred if that judge had recused himself, if he hadn't been attempting to create a disruption. However, regardless of how many ways she analyzed the situation, she couldn't alter the fact that she had slapped a man in open court, a man who presented no danger, who was not a suspect, who held the position of a sitting judge, and the entire country witnessed it. During one afternoon, her neighbor, Mrs. Beasley, who previously waved at her during morning jogs, passed by with her dog and did not even acknowledge Tiffany. That small instance affected her more than anticipated. The subtle dismissal, the courteous rejection, it felt more impactful than the news reports. Because news reports disappear, but being overlooked, that remains. She magnified her image. Sunglasses, a smirk, her hand rested on her hip. At the time, she believed she projected power. Now, she perceived only arrogance. However, just as she felt her decline had reached its lowest point, a letter arrived. It requested her presence at a public hearing, an event that would expose everything and compel her to confront the one man who never increased his volume, but had already undermined her legacy. A public hearing was planned for a Thursday morning at 9:30 a.m. inside the Franklin County Municipal Assembly Hall. The venue itself indicated that this would not be a routine, closed-door assessment. It was intended to be observed. When Tiffany arrived, dressed in a simple black suit, without any identification or weapons, the room was already mostly filled. Journalists occupied the rear wall, their audio equipment attached to their belts. The folding chairs creaked as residents, activists, and legal observers filled them. Behind a line of junior prosecutors, in the second row, sat Judge Antoine Kelly. He wore a dark gray suit instead of a robe, with a legal pad resting on his knee. His eyes were calm, and he appeared to be someone who had come to work, present to observe, not to punish. Tiffany's lawyer, recently appointed and a young public defender who had accepted her case with some hesitation, stood next to her, offering instructions she barely registered. Facing them, the Civilian Review Board was arranged in a semicircle of plastic nameplates and serious faces. Present were a retired detective, a former public defender, a local pastor, a community organizer, and a judge from another county. Although it wasn't a courtroom, it felt much like one. Chairwoman Ms. Loretta Vaughn initiated the session precisely. Her voice possessed a sharp clarity that commanded attention. This hearing is not a trial. It is a public review of Officer Tiffany Rourke's conduct, encompassing both recent events and her past record, and assessing its relevance to her continued ability to serve in law enforcement. Tiffany Rourke visibly reacted to the phrase, "continue serving," as if suggesting that possibility remained. It felt, to her, as though this wasn't the conclusion of her career. The proceedings commenced with the courtroom video, displayed on a modest monitor that inadequately conveyed the gravity of the situation, yet allowed for no dispute. The audio reverberated softly within the hall. The sound of the strike, the ensuing quiet, Judge Kelly's composed voice. Following this, testimony was presented. Officer Naomi Brennan delivered her written account concerning the threat Tiffany issued 6 years ago. Her tone remained even but detached. Subsequently, 2 individuals previously arrested testified, both noting that Tiffany's name appeared in their official records, even though they were not present during the incidents. She reportedly authorized their arrests without providing any clarification. A succession of witnesses offered similar accounts, while Tiffany remained still, her gaze fixed forward, exhibiting no visible response. Towards the conclusion of the proceedings, the chairwoman requested Judge Kelly to approach the microphone. He arrived without legal documents or written notes, simply standing with his jacket fastened and then speaking. I will not take this board's time reiterating what everyone witnessed. That information is already part of the public record. He began. What I want to focus on is what follows accountability, because that's where the essential work commences. He paused. A few pens scratched against paper. I have served this county for over a decade. I have observed people commit reckless actions out of fear. I have seen people lash out because they felt insignificant. But what transpired that day in my courtroom was neither fear nor a mistake. It was an instinctive reaction developed over years of unrestricted authority. He shifted subtly, just enough to connect with Tiffany's gaze. I'm not present to destroy anyone's life. I'm here to bring this community to remember what justice should embody, and what it must not resemble evermore. Then he took his seat. There was no applause, no acknowledgments, only silence. Tiffany's legal representative offered some concluding remarks, largely formal, primarily requesting compassion. It was inconsequential. The board observed a short break prior to releasing their recommendation. Officer Tiffany Rourke was scheduled for permanent removal from duty. All benefits were to be revoked, and her conduct would be referred to the state attorney for further review. She remained still, appearing detached, as the room cleared. The way people regarded her had changed, not with fear or even animosity, but with a lack of interest. That absence of concern felt particularly painful. Judge Kelly passed her as he left. He did not pause. He did not glance back. Because some individuals do not require revenge, the truth was sufficient. Long after the cameras stopped flashing, the question lingered. What lesson would the community retain from the quiet that ultimately compelled the system to respond? Weeks elapsed. The headlines diminished. Other controversies gained prominence. Yet, in Franklin County, a change occurred. Genuinely this time. Not merely in hushed conversations. Not in secret meetings. But in the way people viewed the system. In the way they viewed one another. The courtroom where it happened remained active. Cases proceeded as they always did. However, a palpable shift occurred when Judge Antoine Kelly entered the room. Everyone rose with a distinct air of reverence, not solely due to his position, but because of how he conducted himself. He never sought recognition or accolades. He consistently performed his duties. On one afternoon, following a juvenile hearing, a young public defender approached him in the hallway. "Can I ask you something, Judge?" She inquired, looking around. She then asked, "That day, how did you stay calm?" He paused for a moment. I preferred not to give her what she anticipated. Then he smiled gently. He nodded once, and he walked on. That response lingered with her, and it resonated through the courthouse in other ways. Officers began participating in revised bias training that held genuine significance. A community board was granted substantive authority, more than just a nameplate and a folding table. Certain old case files were examined. Not every single one, but a selection, sufficient to signal that the doors were beginning to open. Regarding Tiffany Rourke, she reseated. She divested her home discreetly and relocated to a new area spanning 3 counties. There were no interviews granted, nor any public announcements made. She secured employment in private security for a shipping company. Her name ceased to be prominently featured in news reports, appearing only occasionally as a minor reference in opinion pieces. There was no return to public life, no narrative of recovery. Her decline wasn't sudden, it was gradual. Yet, what she forfeited was the sole thing of consequence to her: authority. And in its place, a silence settled that she couldn't alter. Simultaneously, more individuals stepped forward. Individuals harmed by fellow officers. Significant events, all fueled by what they witnessed in the courtroom. They sought not retribution, but recognition. That was the impact. The incident when Tiffany struck Judge Kelly was pivotal. It represented the culmination of a previously concealed history, a truth that resonated with the public. In a community like Franklin County, where progress typically unfolded gradually and discreetly, such visibility had a profound effect, extending far beyond the police department. The event disrupted the routines of an entire community. During a town hall meeting held 2 months afterward, a woman addressed the group. She appeared older, with her glasses slipping down her nose, and spoke with a steady voice. "I don't want another apology," she stated. "I want policies. I want change that doesn't wait for the next viral video." The room acknowledged her sentiment, understanding precisely what she meant. They understood because they had witnessed the repercussions when someone believes their badge provides immunity from accountability. Reality entered the room, presenting itself with the authority of a judge. This wasn't a fabricated narrative. There were no 11th-hour collapses, no sensational admissions. Instead, it was the gradual decline of an individual from a position of high regard, and the subsequent, equally deliberate effort to construct something more substantial in its place. The confines of that courtroom would forever remember the events that transpired within them. The initial impact might diminish. The media attention may dissipate, but the underlying principle endured. Unfettered power can become destructive. A lack of expression can carry more weight than vocal protest. And genuine justice doesn't require a forceful declaration to be acknowledged. What lessons can we draw from these observations? Perhaps it's that a person's true nature invariably emerges when no one appears to be observing, when a feeling of invulnerability takes hold, or when a facade falls away in a moment that cannot be retrieved. Tiffany established a dominion based on intimidation. Judge Kelly cultivated his standing through composure. Only one of them presently holds a position in the setting, ultimately, that embodies justice. Should this account prompt reflection, evoke emotion, or simply inspire a moment of consideration, please subscribe to the channel. We share narratives that others hesitate to explore, with truth as our guiding principle. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. And he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison." Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshaun had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshaun? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence. Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. Let's take a look. The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced, she stated, only that it should be enforced fairly. There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly? Naomi replied concisely. It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective. He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. I'll accept her. The judge cleared his throat. We'll admit the video for review. Continue. Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop, that specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expression softened. The clerk paused her pen-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment. Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge. "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good," he chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it?" "I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. "Let's return to the matter at hand." Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. "Miss Ellison," he stated as she resumed her testimony, "let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation?" Naomi responded promptly. "Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick W. v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy." The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. "I notice you're quite well informed," he remarked. "Yes, Your Honor." He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yick W., she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, speaking almost calmly now, "what exactly do you want from this court?" Naomi took a breath. "I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny." She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. "May I review your notes?" Naomi was taken aback. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them." The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. "This is remarkable," he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, "However, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield." Naomi did not avert her gaze. "Then perhaps the structure requires pressure." The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment." But the woman did not flinch. "I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings." While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. "You all right?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. "Why would she say that?" Naomi asked, almost to herself. "Why would someone like her defend me?" Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. "Miss Ellison," she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. "Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood, particularly without the qualifications? That's not something that can be fabricated." Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. "I'm not attempting to compliment you," she said. "I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential." Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." Judith smiled, then rose. "Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive." Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. "Yo, who are you right now?" She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. "I'm just me." However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. "They're ready." Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieve her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. "Proceed." She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. "My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others." A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, "We've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them." Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. "You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all." Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. "Not yet. I may not hold a degree," Naomi stated, "but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to." Her voice faltered just a little at that final word. Not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager. Still human. Still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic." He paused. "You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic." Another pause. "I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard." A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. "To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance." He tapped the gavel once. "Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned." Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her age school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent," Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this? Law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate. 2 adult men were laughing at a young woman attempting to work out. The gym was full, but no one intervened. That is until Terrence spoke up and caused everyone to stop ignoring the situation. The familiar scent of sweat and rubber filled the air. Dumbbells made a clunking sound, treadmills vibrated, and a few early gym-goers strained through their exercises with headphones on. It was a little after 7 a.m. at Ironworks Fitness in Knoxville, Tennessee. A typical Tuesday for many, but for Terrence Roy, it was leg day. Leg day held a special significance. He was finishing up wiping down the leg press when he noticed her. She appeared to be no older than 25. She had a tall, athletic build, her hair pulled back, and looked slightly out of place, as if it were her first week at that gym. She lingered near the squat rack, clearly attempting to adjust the bar. This wasn't uncommon. Everyone begins somewhere. However, He then observed something else. Two men, likely in their mid to late 30s, white, wearing compression shirts that seemed unnecessary and displaying an unwarranted confidence. They were not exercising. They simply stood, resting on the preacher curl bench, observing her. Initially, the sounds were quiet, hushed whispers and slight chuckles. Then, one of them spoke, his voice carrying enough for many in the gym to hear. "Hey, sweetheart, that bar's heavier than you. Are you certain you don't need assistance?" The other responded with a loud, distinct laugh. She likely saw it on TikTok and believed she could simply enter and lift as a professional. Terrence paused, towel still in hand. His body tightened. He recognized that tone, sarcastic, yet with an underlying negativity. A combination of mockery and a sense of privilege. The kind that diminishes you without physical confrontation. The woman remained silent, continuously adjusting the bar, her gaze fixed forward. A subtle tremor ran through her hands. She inhaled deeply, as if suppressing something. Terrence surveyed the room. Approximately 15 people were present. Some had overheard something. He observed this by their reactions. A man wearing a red hoodie glanced at his phone, feigning disinterest. A woman near the ellipticals seemed uneasy, but remained silent. There was no movement, no vocalization. He settled onto a nearby bench, observing for a moment longer. Then, the realization struck him. This was bigger than just those two individuals and their inappropriate remarks. It concerned everyone present, including him, as they observed the event unfold and remained silent. Such incidents hadn't been uncommon in a location like this before. However, it may have been the first instance he found impossible to overlook. He rose deliberately, secured his water bottle, and approached. "Hey," he stated, his voice composed yet resolute. The two men turned. One displayed a smirk. "Talking to us?" The taller one questioned, raising his eyebrows. Terrence affirmed. "Do you find it amusing to harass someone while she's attempting to train?" The shorter one shrugged. "Relax, man. We were just joking," he said. "She didn't laugh," Terrence said, shifting his gaze towards the woman. She shook her head, softly. Several heads now turned. A man pausing between sets looked up. A staff member behind the counter moved closer, listening. The taller man folded his arms. "Your father or something?" he asked. "No, just someone who's tired of people thinking this kind of thing is acceptable." A silence descended, thick and tense, yet he remained still. "Look, man," the shorter one began, his earlier confidence diminished. "We didn't intend any harm." Terrence acknowledged, "Yeah, that's the issue," but the room remained unresponsive. He sensed an underlying tension, a peculiar quietness born of people feigning ignorance of what they had clearly heard. A palpable tension filled the room, as if everyone was holding their breath, anticipating how much further it would escalate before someone intervened. That's the feeling at Ironworks. Terrence remained still, and so did the two men. The taller man, identified as Kyle by his bright blue gym badge, still wore a tight smirk, though his arms were now folded across his chest, a less overtly confident posture. The shorter man, Bryce, had taken a step back, as if uncertain if a confrontation was imminent. Terrence was not present to engage in a physical altercation. He didn't need to. His mere presence conveyed authority. And for a man like him, 40 years old, with 2 children and 2 decades of maintaining composure in tense situations, he had learned that sometimes remaining still could be the most impactful action. But he also observed something else. Still, few people intervened. Some glanced up, then looked back down as if they had mistakenly chosen the wrong performance and wished to change channels. Others appeared uneasy, seemingly hoping he would cease and move on, and it stung him. Not because he anticipated assistance, but because he understood how readily people could retreat behind their earbuds or phone screens when situations became complex. One man, likely in his mid-50s, sat on a bench pressing dumbbells. He shook his head, not at Kyle or Bryce, but at Terrence, as if he were the issue, as if speaking out was more troubling than the inappropriate comments being made initially. The young woman, who had been silent, now sat on the edge of the squat rack platform, pretending to tie her shoe, even though it was already secure. It was a way to keep occupied, a way to avoid looking at anyone. She wished she wasn't involved in this situation, but she already was. Terrence took a deliberate breath. He angled himself, just enough so his voice would reach everyone. You all heard what they said, and you observed how she reacted. He spoke, not yelling, but ensuring his voice carried throughout the room. If someone addressed your sister, your daughter, your friend in that manner, would you remain silent? Still, no response. Kyle appeared to be about to speak, as if he had a clever retort prepared. However, only a tense jaw and narrowed eyes were visible. Bryce moved again. Listen, man, nobody intends to provoke a conflict here. Terrence nodded, seeming to reconsider. Lauren, the gym manager, who was in her mid-30s with a blonde ponytail and a name tag, approached from behind the front desk. She moved deliberately, appearing somewhat apprehensive. It seemed she anticipated complaints and was carefully assessing the situation. Is everything okay here? She inquired, her gaze shifting between the men. Terrence responded, just clearing something up. Kyle interjected, this dude thinks he can tell us what to say to people now. Lauren observed him, then the woman who remained near the barbell. She understood, perhaps not immediately, but sufficiently. Well, she stated cautiously, we don't permit harassment here. If anyone feels disrespected, that is something we must address seriously. Bryce laughed dismissively. Harassment? He remarked. We said one thing, he added. Terrence interjected. That was enough. A silence followed. Then, Lauren slowly turned toward the young woman. Are you all right? She inquired. The woman rose, silent but composed. She stated she was only here to exercise. Lauren affirmed, understood. You are welcome here. Please inform us if you encounter any further issues. And that concluded the interaction. The atmosphere didn't ease with a significant event. There was no altercation, no theatrical display, no commendation. However, a change occurred. Bryce and Kyle shared a glance. Subsequently, without further conversation, they departed toward the locker room, speaking quietly to themselves. No one intervened. It wasn't necessary. Terrence turned and made eye contact with the woman. She offered him a slight nod, a gesture of thanks without speaking. More impactful than the interaction itself was the stillness, the expressions, and the way others seemed to shrink in that instant. He repeatedly considered what the outcome would have been if he hadn't been present. However, the day continued, and the narrative began to spread beyond the gym. Terrence was in the process of filling his water bottle at the fountain when he detected a voice coming from behind him. A sense of triumph seemed to fill him. He didn't turn around immediately. He recognized the voice. It was Kyle, that familiar mocking tone, now without a crowd, sounding less assertive, more intimate. Terrence quietly replaced the cap on his bottle before turning to face him. Kyle stood alone, his arms hanging loosely, the sharpness in his features softened, replaced by what appeared to be wounded pride. Perhaps embarrassment, maybe simply the annoyance of not having the final say. I'm not here to be a hero, Terrence stated. I came here to exercise, just like everyone else. Kyle moved nearer. You reacted excessively over a minor incident. She hadn't expressed any concerns. You intervened as if she required assistance. Terrence subtly supported himself against the wall, maintaining his composure. She didn't need rescuing, but she shouldn't have been ridiculed either. You deliberately made her feel uneasy. Kyle made a dismissive sound. So now you're the guardian of feelings. Terrence inclined his head. It was simply a grown man weary of witnessing individuals feigning acceptance of public displays of erratic behavior. Kyle's jaw tightened. You don't know me, and you don't know her, Terrence responded. But that didn't prevent him from speaking. There was a pause, a genuine one, where Kyle remained motionless, blinking, as if a portion of him wasn't accustomed to anyone challenging without shouting or striking. Just statements, simply a reflection. Then Kyle surveyed his surroundings. The hallway adjacent to the locker rooms was silent. Just them and the low hum of a treadmill belt nearby. You people always got to make it racial, he muttered. Terrence felt it. That shift, that old tired line, meant to flip the blame, meant to derail. He kept his voice steady. You brought race into it when you thought she was an easy target. You thought nobody would say anything. That's not on me. Kyle didn't answer. I've been in places like this all my life, Terrence went on, and I know when something's just a joke. When a situation arose involving asserting dominance, Terrence remained silent. Then Kyle exhaled sharply and mumbled, "Whatever, man." As he turned towards the locker room, Terrence observed him leave, then subtly shook his head. It wasn't a reaction of anger, nor of triumph, but of understanding. He had no desire to cause humiliation. He didn't require a public victory. The crucial aspect was that he had been heard, that Kyle, even if unwilling to acknowledge it, recognized it. And at that moment, a voice spoke behind him, quieter this time. It was the young woman. She had changed her shirt, with her hoodie pulled halfway over her head. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost a whisper for saying something. Terrence gave a small smile. "You're welcome. I didn't know what to do," she added. "I just froze." "That's okay," he said. "You don't owe anyone a reaction. That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes just making it through moments like that is enough." She nodded. "I'm Janelle," she said to Terrence. They shook hands. "Do you come here often?" she inquired, with a slight amusement at how predictable it seemed. "3 times a week," he stated, "in the morning before work." She responded with a smile. "It appears I will begin arriving early as well." Then, she proceeded towards the exit. There were no tears, no dramatic display of emotion. Simply a moment of quiet understanding between two individuals who now had a shared experience. However, as that phase concluded, another development had already begun to unfold beyond the gym's confines. By the time Terrence arrived home that evening, the children were already partially through dinner. Sonia, his wife, balanced a laptop on her knee while guiding their youngest through spelling homework, as was typical for a weekday. It reminded him that everyday life continues regardless of significant events that occurred earlier. However, the burden persisted as he entered. He attempted to shed it at the gym, to release it while driving. But such experiences don't always remain where they originate. They travel with you, subtly. "How was the gym?" Sonia inquired while serving mashed potatoes for their son, Caleb. Terrence paused. It was peculiar, actually, that prompted her to look up, her eyebrows raised. He recounted everything to her. He presented only the facts, without embellishment or exaggeration. What Kyle and Bryce had said, how no one intervened initially, and how he ultimately did. He described Janelle's reaction, the discomfort, and the ensuing silence. Sonia listened intently, chewing deliberately and maintaining eye contact. Upon his completion, she leaned back and released a breath through her nose. "It's the typical situation," she remarked, not dismissively, but with a weary tone, a recognizable tiredness. "I understand," Terrence responded. "However, something about today felt different." "Do you mean the fact that you were the sole person to comment?" she inquired. "Yes, that," and he hesitated. "I observed how many people listened and remained silent. Because that's often the way things unfold," she stated, rising to rinse a plate. "People avoid involvement. They desire to prevent uncomfortable moments. They're apprehensive about speaking up and becoming entangled. Some believe it's not their concern." He nodded slowly. "It shouldn't be typical," he thought. "It shouldn't," she replied in agreement. However, it was later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was still, when Terrence checked his phone. Alerts appeared from a local Facebook group he followed, Knoxville Fit Life Community. A post detailed the event. "Saw something crazy at Ironworks today. A man stood up for a woman being teased by 2 guys at the squat rack. There was no violence, just a direct challenge, which is commendable." The post already had over 100 comments. Some users expressed praise for the individual. Others inquired about the situation. A few responded with predictable reactions. The complete details are unknown. It seems people are easily offended these days. Humor is no longer tolerated. Terrence did not participate in the discussion. He simply observed it unfold. A short clip was even posted, a shaky, 3-second phone video showing him standing in front of Kyle and Bryce, his back to the camera. A still image depicts a man steadfastly remaining in place. He felt uncomfortable being the focus of attention. not due to shame, but because it diverted focus from the core message. The intention was for the discussion to highlight how easily inappropriate actions can go unnoticed if no one speaks up. The following morning at the gym, the atmosphere had shifted. Janelle was present again. This time, she offered him a fist bump, her face displaying a friendly smile as if they had been gym companions for years. People observed without negativity. Several individuals nodded in his direction, a gesture of understanding rather than attention-seeking. Lauren, the gym manager, approached him discreetly once he concluded a set. "Hey," she began, "thank you again for yesterday." He turned to face her. "We're experienced previous difficulties," she explained, with people voicing sentiments they perceive as benign. "This time, discussions are occurring about it. Perhaps it will bring about a change. Maybe," he responded. Just as he reached for his towel, a man from the back, appearing to be in his mid-60s, with a wiry build and gray in his beard, approached. "I was here yesterday," he stated. Terrence raised an eyebrow. "Yes," the man confirmed. He paused, then added, "I didn't say anything then. Should have. I have 2 granddaughters. I often think if that were one of them, I want someone like you close by." Terrence remained silent for a moment. Then the man offered a half smile and said, "Appreciate that. My name's Roland. If you ever need a place to stay, I'm around." Terrence hadn't anticipated who would enter next, and the words he would speak. Terrence hadn't expected anyone in particular when the gym doors opened late that Friday afternoon. But there he was, Bryce. No Kaidi, no Savagir, no Zmirk. Just a man walking in with headphones around his neck and something in his eyes that hadn't been there previously. Terrence noticed him the moment he entered. He was uncertain whether Bryce would disregard him, attempt a confrontation, or act as if the previous day hadn't occurred. However, Bryce did not feign indifference. Instead, he approached Terrence directly after he completed his warm-up set on the lat pull-down machine. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been previously. "Do you have a minute?" Terrence hesitated before responding. He maintained his grip on the machine's handle, carefully observing Bryce's expression for any indication of mockery. He detected none. "All right," Terrence finally said. Bryce shifted his weight, restless. "I spoke with Kyle," he started. "He believes you intentionally embarrassed us. He's still upset, but—" Terrence remained silent. "I have 2 sons," Bryce continued, aged 10 and 8. "They were at the park recently. I observe an older boy teasing them. Nothing serious, just provoking them. And I understood. I felt paralyzed. I didn't know how to react. I simply watched." He hesitated. "I recalled my silence during that incident with the girl. We were certainly behaving poorly, and Terrence observed it." "Now what?" "You were right," Bryce stated, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want to be that person, not for my children and not for my own sake." Terrence shifted back a little. "It's not about being correct. It's about recognizing when to cease being the individual you'd avoid encountering." Bryce affirmed. They stood in silence for a moment. Just 2 men in gym clothes, under fluorescent lights, speaking as if the conversation held significance. "I'm not going to apologize for Kyle," Bryce stated. "He's got his own things to sort out. But I do apologize for my words, for my behavior." Terrence extended his hand. "I accept that," they said, shaking hands firmly, briefly, genuinely. Later that evening, Terrence sat on the porch with his daughter, Elise, who just turned 14 and had recently taken an interest in running. She inquired about what occurred at the gym. She remembered hearing her mom briefly mention something earlier. He paused, then recounted the events. He presented the information directly, without minimizing its impact. He described the conversation, the quiet moments, the disagreement, and the subsequent apology. He observed her reaction as he spoke, noting the shifts in her expression with each detail. "So you simply spoke with them?" she questioned, lifting her eyebrows. "Yes," he replied. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't create a disturbance. I simply asked them why they believed that type of conduct was acceptable. Did that have an effect? It didn't produce immediate changes, but perhaps it prompted reflection. That's frequently how shifts begin." Elise glanced at her sneakers, fiddling with the laces. "I'm not sure I would have the courage to say something like that," she whispered. Terrence smiled. "The interesting aspect is You don't feel courageous when you do it. You simply feel that someone needs to. She looked up at him, her eyes gentle, yet containing something else now. Perhaps pride. I will try, she said softly. You don't need to do anything special, he responded. Just pay attention. When something doesn't feel right, don't ignore it. Speak up if you can, or be there for someone who can't. They sat in silence for a while afterward. There was no need to fill the space, just the kind of silence that felt substantial instead of vacant. But Monday was approaching, and someone unexpected still had something to say before this story would feel complete. Monday morning began as any other. Terrence parked in his usual spot, swiped his gym card at the front desk, and proceeded to the free weights. He anticipated a routine start to the week, nothing out of the ordinary. Then he noticed him. Roland, the older man who had spoken to him a few days prior, was positioned by the dumbbell rack, stretching his shoulders as if preparing for an extensive set. However, today he wasn't in workout clothes. He wore jeans, boots, and a dark jacket zipped up halfway. He wasn't here to train. He was waiting. Got a minute? Roland inquired, glancing up as Terrence neared. Terrence affirmed, and they walked towards the small lounge area near the vending machines. The gym was still, and few noticed them. Roland clasped his hands together, appearing hesitant. I've been considering what occurred, he finally stated. What you did, what you said. Terrence remained silent. Roland added, I'm 66. I've witnessed a great deal in my years. I spent my childhood in Ohio during the 60s. My father owned a tire shop. We weren't wealthy, but we managed. I recall the time the schools integrated. I remember the underlying stress. However, we never discussed it at home, he paused. And because of that lack of discussion, I felt unprepared when difficult situations arose. I would witness events, both at work and around town, and would tell myself, well, that's not my concern, believing silence equated to neutrality. It became clear later that it was not the case. Terrence listened, remaining silent. Roland's voice lowered a little. The day you spoke to those men, I was present. I was 2 benches away. I heard everything. Terrence nodded slowly, and I assumed you noticed. I felt compelled to intervene. I truly did, but I couldn't speak. I remained motionless. He reacted with a shake of his head, and I'm still regretting it. Terrence moved closer. You are here now. That has value. Roland exhaled. I have grandchildren, 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls are of mixed heritage. My daughter married a black man, a good guy who teaches 6th grade. I often think about them. If they had been in that gym and someone had spoken to them in that manner, I would want someone like Terrence present, someone who wouldn't remain silent. The room felt different now, not negatively, simply more substantial. I've expressed sentiments in the past that I regret, Roland admitted. I've allowed certain things to go unaddressed that I shouldn't have, but I am striving to improve. That's why I came today, to offer my gratitude, and to assure you that I will speak up in the future. No more hesitation. Terrence finally smiled. That meant more than you probably realize. They shook hands again. This one felt different. Not a gesture of thanks, but a recognition of a new understanding. I might even start working out again, Roland added with a chuckle. Terrence grinned. Start with light weights. Don't go breaking something. They both laughed, and the tension in the air finally eased. Following Roland's departure, Terrence stood near the mirror wall, a towel draped over his shoulder, and observed the room for a brief moment. It was the same gym with the same walls. Yet, it felt altered, not due to any sudden improvement in everyone's abilities, nor because of the eradication of racism, but because of a subtle change. One person spoke, another listened, a third reconsidered their perspective. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it represented a difference. And sometimes, a small difference is enough to initiate progress. Even with everything, the true understanding didn't come until Terrence saw what his daughter posted later that night. It was approximately 9:30 when Terrence finally sat down on the edge of his bed. Shoes kicked off, lights dimmed, the soft hum of the hallway fan in the background. Sonia was reading, legs curled under the blanket, her glasses sliding down her nose. He grabbed his phone to check a few messages before bed, and that's when he saw a new post from Elise. He clicked. It was a selfie. An ordinary picture, her hair pulled back, no filter, wearing her school hoodie. But it was the caption that stopped him. My dad stood up for a stranger this week. He didn't yell, he didn't throw hands, he just spoke up. And that was enough to make people think, including me. I used to believe keeping quiet made you neutral, but I was wrong. Silence has side. I hope I'm brave like him when it matters. Terrence stared at the screen, not because he was surprised by the message, but because it was so confident and direct. It had come from his teenage daughter, the one who used to feel anxious requesting ketchup from a server, the one who once cried when she had to recite a poem in front of her class. And now she was sharing words like that publicly. He glanced at Sonia and gave her the phone. She read it quietly, then smiled without looking up. You seem to notice she's observing your actions, don't you? Terrence sighed. I'm mostly just attempting to make it through the week. She responded, setting the phone down on the nightstand. You're managing better than that. He reclined, gazing at the ceiling, allowing the feeling to linger. Everything that transpired in the last few days, Kyle, Bryce, Janelle, Roland, Elise, all began with a single choice. Not a significant one, not a sensational one. Simply a decision to speak instead of remaining silent. That was all. That recollection remained with him profoundly. People often assume that taking a stand requires fearlessness, but that isn't the reality. Frequently, one experiences fear and doubt. There's a reluctance to create awkwardness. Yet, remaining silent has consequences for others. He recalled Janelle's expression when she described feeling paralyzed. He remembered Roland's nervous habit of rubbing his hands together as he confessed his uncertainty about what to do. He recalled Bryce struggling to express regret without appearing vulnerable. And he mused, this is the beginning. Not with elaborate pronouncements, not with online condemnation, but in tangible locations with genuine individuals who opt for the somewhat more challenging course of action. The subsequent morning, Terrence paused in his vehicle within the gym parking lot prior to entering, not to prepare himself, simply to contemplate. Afterward, he retrieved his phone and composed a message. It wasn't intended for widespread dissemination. The goal wasn't validation, it was simply sharing a truth. Significant impact doesn't require a grand gesture. It involves acknowledging injustice and speaking out, regardless of fear or isolation. That's where progress begins. He published the message and exited the vehicle. It was another Monday, another workout, but with a feeling of lightness he hadn't experienced previously. Many people have experienced moments similar to those described. If you've hesitated in the past, remember you have future opportunities. The important consideration is, in those future instances, how will you respond? Speak out, even when it causes discomfort, even if the matter seems minor. Because remaining silent may preserve your ease, but it won't safeguard another's dignity. And someone close to you may be awaiting a voice such as yours. Should this story have struck a chord, please share it and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, as we have additional stories exploring the true meaning of doing what's right.